I'm thrilled to have with me in the Security Ledger studio today two individuals who have been ringing the bell hard about the risks to both safety and privacy posed by Flock and its widely deployed surveillance technology. Ben Jordan is a musician, recording artist, and a security researcher, also known as a Renaissance man, with more than 900,000 followers on his YouTube channel, where he has advanced tools and policies to protect the rights of artists and musicians from exploitation by AI. More recently, Ben's been digging into the workings of Flock safety surveillance cameras that happen to be deployed in his own community with some pretty jaw-dropping discoveries that we'll discuss. And with Ben is John Gaines, aka Gainsec. John's a lifelong hacker and these days a principal security researcher at a leading cybersecurity firm where he performs AI-driven threat analysis, exploit development, application security research, etc. And in the last year, John's devoted a lot of his free time on Gainsec and untold hours to exploring and unpacking the workings and security or insecurity of Flock devices, including their license plate readers, LPRs, gunshot detection technology, and more. Ben and John, welcome to Security Ledger Podcast.
Hi, how's it going?
Happy to be here.
It's great to see you both. So let's start off with how, and I'll ask you each to talk about this separately, how Flock safety and the Flock cameras got onto your radar and what got you looking into them. Ben, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I live in Atlanta, which is the most heavily surveilled place in the United States. Strangely, one wouldn't think of it to be like that, as it's in a purple state. It's generally where Georgia's kind of like a mid-level on everything lately. Anyway, yeah, I've just noticed all these black cameras, and like most people, I think I just thought that they were maybe traffic monitoring cameras, or you just appeal to authority a little bit, and you're like, yeah, they're probably just to make things easier to organize and plan. And of course, yeah, I did a little bit of research, and the moment I did a little bit of research, I did a lot more research and found out how potentially pervasive they are. And of course, one thing that Flock does is they don't even use ALPR. They just call themselves LPRs, license plate readers. They really downplay. It's funny because on the side when they're communicating with the public, they're an LPR. All they're doing is reading your license plate.
Right.
No biggie. When they're communicating to police or law enforcement, we're going to give you one click to one case solved. That's actually their tagline. And it's through their AI and through their open source intelligence data gathering for every license plate.
ALPR gets a bigger
AILPR almost. So went down that rabbit hole and I was like, okay, I have this platform. And also it would be interesting to try and use the same types of adversarial noise attacks that I've used on music and smart devices against license plate readers to see if that would be effective. And then after that video came out, that video was pretty successful. It got a lot more people interested, like just it's from my community alone. A lot of people got like very interested and maybe even a little militant about it. They were just like, yeah, this is very wrong. We don't want this in our community. And yeah. I worked on a different project and I had to go to Yellowstone and I traveled around the country for this project. And the entire time I was still in the Flock zone. I was just like, because everywhere I was going, I was seeing these cameras.
Right.
My partner was saying to me, like, you just released this massive video on this company. Do you think that they're tracking our car now? And I was like, the fact that this is like not a paranoid conversation to have, the fact that this is very realistic makes it all the more terrifying. Yeah. And so, yeah, then right on that trip, instead of doing what I was supposed to be doing, I was starting to dig into some of the security vulnerabilities and things like that. And that's where I started finding out about research from folks like John.
We should point out also, Atlanta happens to be the home of Flock Safety, the company. So
yeah, I'm less stone's throw from their gigantic new drone factory.
Yeah. Just for folks who aren't familiar, what does a Flock deployment look like? If you're driving around your community, what should you be looking for?
Yeah, generally the most common cameras, I believe, are the Falcons, which are these sort of long, they're about 8 to 10 inches tall, black cameras that have solar panels above them that keep them powered. And they're usually on a black pole. They're attached to the pole with a hose clamp, which, yeah, and they don't really look that well protected. That, and I guess at first they don't really look that ominous because of that. Maybe they don't.
Yeah.
And yeah, once you know once you search flock camera, look at a picture of it, then you'll be like, oh,
You'll see 'em.
those, because they are, even in areas where they're not as prominent, as pervasive as they are down here in Atlanta. They are everywhere. And like I said, when I drove across the country, I couldn't believe it. I was in like tiny little towns in South Dakota, in Montana, and I'm just like, really?
Yeah.
Like in the Best Buy parking lot? Really? Like on this side road getting off the expressway? Like, why? And yeah, they're all over.
Yeah. 4,000 communities nationwide. And John, obviously, you got a long history doing security research, including on embedded devices, Internet of Things devices. What put the Flock products and camera on your...
Yeah. So prior to my current role, I did consulting, which, unlike most consulting, is really just pen testing externally, right, for companies. And actually, IoT hardware embedded stuff was actually one of the service lines that I had the least experience doing. So I had maybe a handful of engagements under my belt. But as I started to build more of a hardware lab and acquiring tools and debuggers, I was like, I need an excuse to purchase this stuff. And so I wanted to, in my free time, get deeper into that, be able to leverage the other stuff I was doing, like the client software and mobile and so on. And I didn't want to do the router or the IP camera that around, right? So I started to chat with ChatGPT and start to look everywhere I go and say, what are some other smart devices, which led me to Fish, who do like these roadside units, V2X stuff, which is, I had a paper published in Frac about regarding that research recently. And then after that, I was like, what's next? And so I was driving around and I was like, hey, what is that? What's that black pole? And I ended up looking it up, and it just so happens that their stuff was the cheapest. So when I started looking at license plate readers, commercial ones on eBay and other sites, their stuff happened to be the cheapest. So that's how Flock came on my radar.
And probably not surprisingly, the most common, cheap and widely deployed. Interesting. So you obtained a Flock camera just secondhand, took it apart, and high level, what are some of the things that you found?
So the first device I purchased was probably a Falcon, right? The most common, or Sparrow, actually. When they're static, they're called Sparrows. License plate readers, right? And then a gunshot detection unit. It just happened to be that, I guess, this wasn't as on many people's radars. So like they were still pretty available and very cheap. And fairly quickly, one, I was extremely surprised to open the gunshot detection system and see an ESP chip. That was definitely not what I expected. And then additionally, depending on the model of the Sparrow, it was running an Android SOM that was very old, past its end of life. And some of them even come with micro USB ports and stuff like that. And so fairly quickly, although I like to tie my hands behind my back and say, let me try to get a shell wirelessly, remotely first, right? Before I like do, connect to that port or do a desolder job or anything like that. Very quickly it became clear that, okay, these do not have the most basic protections, which, I mean, and we can definitely get into it, is expected. It's the Wild West right now in hardware, which is why it's so fun. But like this definitely is more extreme than what I've seen in the past.
So one of the things that you discovered was that it was possible by pressing the power button on any Flock camera to basically get root access to it, to get access to the administrative interface for the camera. Is that right?
I can tell you, I didn't discover the button sequence, funnily enough. After my first round of disclosures, where I disclosed fully how to get a root shell, I was searching social media, and someone else actually found, when they were trying to recreate my stuff, the button sequence. Since then, of course, I've traced it back in the decompiled APKs, but I don't want to take credit for discovering that. But what I did see was that the hotspot had this secure password that was the same on the Raven and other models that I had access to. And ultimately, what that lets you do, so you have this hotspot, you activate it yourself, or you find it in the wild, which is like what attracted me to when I saw Ben's first video. Is he mentioned he saw one of these hotspots in the wild, and I was like, I need to talk to this guy. If that's true, that changes the game, right? It now goes from a gated wireless to a wireless RC. Like that's big. And so you connect to the hotspot with this weak password, and then they have two ways to deploy their video feeds, but the main one is called Collins, and that exposes this web service, this API endpoint, which has no authentication or authorization. And it exposed some endpoints that allow you to do actions like enable ADB over TCP, which then, of course, they don't have any type of ADB keys or any type of authentication on that level either, right? So then you can just connect to it from there. And so that allows you initially, right, to get this shell as the restricted user. And then there was some other steps. So from there, almost all, if not all of their custom deployed APKs that come with the devices have debugging enabled, which is
Yeah,
ideally
right.
not good. And it's pretty trivial, was trivial, right, to use that to get system command injection, right? And then that eventually led me to find a service that was running just like the data log cleanup service, right? That plugs in this raw Android property right into the script that's run as root every single time.
And Ben, one of the things that you and John called out was common components and Android things, operating system. And then John, as you mentioned, end of life operating system. So no longer supported, no longer receiving security updates. When you look at the construction of these cameras and other devices, it would seem the focus is on low cost and the consequences not very high security. Just talk about some of the sort of structural issues with these Flock deployments.
Yeah, I think for me, and this is just my assumption, they're just trying to get to the bottom of why something would be so bad in terms of the OS they're using, or the fact that they're using Android or Android things in the first place. Is you have this massive amount of features for something that is very deliberate. It apparently the company started, I think it was actually using an Android smartphone to run the sort of alpha version of the software that they were making to try and get this whole thing to work. And it seems like they just kept getting funding and just kept making Android stuff, which rather than having the team develop something that's lower level, that's more deliberate and therefore more easier to secure. And so, yeah, I think they just rapidly expanded with a bunch of Android Oreo devices. And then just as more investors got involved, I assume that they're just trying to plug their ears and sprint towards IPO as quickly as they can. So this isn't the investor's problem when it actually has to be dealt with. And who knows how many cameras they have to replace the hardware for, but I'm assuming that it's a very significant amount that would very much change the profit value of the company.
And John, if you were a malicious actor, if you read Flock's press releases and responses to some of the work that you've done or Ben have done, some of what they're saying as well, some of these these don't affect the functioning of the device, which kind of but also you would need physical access to be able to carry out these attacks. But John, just from your perspective, you're a malicious actor, cyber criminal, individual, state actor. Would you need physical access to a device? And given that these are deployed remotely and there are tens of thousands or millions of them deployed, of course, getting physical access to a device is not a limiting factor. But what would you say are the risks limited to, you need physical access to a camera to be able to pull off some of these attacks? I think you've shown, no, you don't.
Just to jump in really fast, I have seen cameras that had a wireless access point enabled just in the wild.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Just to point that out. Not everyone does. I don't think it's a common thing, but I have seen it, which I didn't know about John's attack chain when I saw them. It was when I was in the process of making my first video. But I would assume that I could just pull my car up next to it and
try and connect. Yeah. John, how would you formulate an attack on a Flock deployment?
Yeah. So if they contracted me formally, because that's usually right. Try to do what the bad guys would do. Yeah, Wiggle definitely has a list of Flock hotspots around the country that are accessible. Last time I checked, it was over like 600, and that's after I tried my best to filter all the ESP, BSSIDs, and stuff like that. Right, so it was really most likely these vulnerable Flock devices. Yes, if the hotspot is open, it's a completely different game, right? Or if, for example, if it was like connected to a different wireless access point or something like that, right? That makes interception and all that kind of stuff pretty trivial, right? It isn't like they use some super fancy cert-based authentication to connect to anything, to any hotspot or anything. Yeah, so that would be the number one priority, right? Done a lot of digging now in terms of trying to find other button sequences that do other stuff, and there definitely is some other interesting ones, as well as some stuff regarding Bluetooth and their batteries, but I haven't even half disclosed that in my paper yet. I haven't seen anything about that, so you could look forward to seeing that, but I'm hoping that will end up being a full wireless attack chain. But in terms of without physical access, it really would be a luck of the draw, basically. Their compute boxes, which is the latest deployments that they use, which are different than the Falcons, right? These have a newer newer Android SOM that are deployed, and then it has like dumb cameras, you could think of them, that connect to it, right? that is a whole different ballgame. Again, still may require physical access, but they have all of the ports and for example, a SIM card tray exposed, like facing like down, if that, whether it requires physical access or not, that's pretty slim. But some of the other things, like when I initially disclosed this gated wireless RCE vector, I called it poke with a stick, right? The flyby, right? So whether it's quote physical access or a drone, a stick, someone else touching it, whatever, that would be the attack vector that I could see, because you can most definitely approach these, right, and hit that without them seeing you.
The physical access thing is also really funny because in my area, I have flock cameras that are literally at arm's length. Like nothing could be easier to touch in that space than that thing. And so for them to use that as their, don't worry, you need physical access to it. So the thing that's next to the sidewalk where people are walking, you just need to press that button. Okay, that's really
yeah. I've never
great
seen
security.
any of them as low as I did by your studio, Ben.
Yeah,
like that was crazy. It was like a little shorter than me. And then the other thing that I also haven't disclosed is that they do have a built-in like reverse proxy that will let you proxy any of the local services over their LTE network as well. But that's something that I will get into separately.
Also, the cameras that are broadcasting an SSID, obviously, I would love to go test them and see, okay, how hard would it be? But realistically, the stuff in my video could have been so much more sensationalized if we weren't following every single law that we had to follow. Like I would we'd be able to go up to these cameras in the wild when John was here in Georgia and then set up an alternate stream to send the data to our computers to where we could access them at any time. We could have, and think about what we could have done if we accessed the Flock network, which may or may not be possible. We can't prove that it's possible without breaking the law, but with all of the hard-coded credentials on the devices. And I think one thing that I didn't really mention in the video, just because I didn't want it to seem too evil or something, but think about the amount of power that you have to give up to be honest about this sort of thing, to actually warn the public, and how many people probably just took that power instead, where they're like, oh, I could track anybody in the country. I think I'll do that instead, especially if I work in open source intelligence or I'm a hacker or whatever.
One of the big issues here is not just the product vulnerabilities, because those are really common across all kinds of devices, cameras, and so on. It's the types of work that these devices are doing and the types of data they're collecting and how that could be abused. And Ben, maybe just so people will understand, Flock has this automated license plate reading technology, almost certainly AI powered, that can automatically identify a license plate on a car, read the license plate, record that information. But as you pointed out, and others, it also records a lot of other information that it's seeing. But how do like law enforcement or potentially, I don't know, homeowners associations or whatever, how are they actually leveraging and using that data? What types of things are done with the data that these cameras are collecting?
Your car passes it. It can get your license plate. It could detect if there's damage to the vehicle. There might be a broken taillight, something like that. Any sort of stickers that you might have on your vehicle, which is something that I've always told people, like, hey, if you care about privacy, maybe don't put a bunch of bumper stickers on your car, because I'm always in traffic behind somebody and it's okay. So you have kids that go to a really expensive school. You're into kayaking, which tells me that you have a bunch of expensive stuff in your garage. It's just, the city you live in and why you're proud to live there. Oh, and obviously anybody who has any sort of 2FA or NRA stuff, it's, oh, cool, guns in your house. Got it. Okay. No. But yeah, so it takes all that stuff. And then the Flock Nova network, which I believe is still in beta, combines that with, it matches these profiles to open source intelligence tools, which I think is just incredibly pervasive and bad. I just think, because when you look at somebody's, if you actually run a profile, this is something I didn't actually include much in the video, but we did it to George Cheedy of The Guardian. We gave him an open source intelligence ride, and he's a very private person. He was like involved in the coverage of the Fulton County stuff with Trump in 2020 here in Georgia. And so he had MAGA very mad at him, and when Trump was trying to turn the state of Georgia in his favor. And so he's very private, and hey, he's definitely had a target on his back before. And yeah, we found all sorts of things about him to eventually made him crack when we found his favorite fast food seafood restaurant or something like that it's like guilty pleasure restaurant. We found that. But Yeah. So then to think that all of this is now just being attached to his license plate. So if a police officer just wants to, they read a license plate and they get just one click and then see all of this stuff. And to me, I have not heard anything even close to resembling an argument that this isn't a Fourth Amendment violation. Like it is as clear to me it could be to. Yeah, I cannot fathom how this would not be a Fourth Amendment violation.
But
Go
I
ahead.
can speak lightly in terms of the AI model. So the majority of the AI processing is in the cloud. However, there are small local models that are running. And so I just released a post on my site, for example, where I made something called Bird Eye, which really is just a harness, right, for their visual recognition ML models that are accessible on the devices, which again is something else that at least they told me that a previous researcher reached out to them and never discussed about, but they just have them in clear text on the devices themselves. And I pulled it off and created a harness and then just ran it. And you can run off a webcam now or feed it a file or an image or even the whole structure that it expects on the device itself. And you can see. So like they aren't on the device recognizing a ton of vehicles like bus, car, truck, trailer, bicycle, motorcycle, person, license plate, and then some of the labels include like cat and dog for whatever reason. But that's about it on the edge because again, remember these devices are extremely old, right? Or the SOMs that they're running, right? And even the newer one, which like the compute box is the latest and greatest, right? But it still uses the same applications as the other device. So it's like kind of bottlenecked in that sense. So the majority of it is going to be is this a vehicle or whatever? Like I said, no. Okay, you're just going to put here, but it doesn't mean it's erased or ignored or whatever, right? It's really in the cloud where Ben was saying, like the bumper stickers and the tracking and all this stuff and flocking over. Like that's really the whole side of it that is where the power comes from, or you could say the OSINTs, right? And who knows? But it's also another completely black abyss that like I can't touch, right? Or really anyone who wants to stay within the legal good area within good faith can look at, poke at. And that's another part of the issue. And then something else that you mentioned in terms of the devices themselves and their excuses, right? Like it's really leaning on the security through obscurity. It's really leaning. I have been working with them. That's their quote, right? For a long time. And so they're aware of even the serial numbers of the devices I have and my disclosures. And nothing that I've posted is a surprise to them, right? That's not okay. And still, I've never heard of any in my communications with them, any indication of any type of remediation, any type of concern. I was warned not by them. I've never been threatened by them, but someone else in the industry reached out to me initially when I disclosed this wireless RC because I included the button sequence initially. And they said, don't do that because these are used by law enforcement. It's now this gray area where even though you did full disclosure and they're aware and told them what you were, et cetera, if someone goes and pokes at one of these, right, like it could come back to me in whatever form. And I feel like it's something that they're heavily leaning on like that. But to me, if you're going to lean on that, then you should hold yourself to a standard, and which is where the root of my issues come from. It should be more secure if you're going to use that.
The CVEs that you discovered with like the LPR, the license plate reader, a lot of them, John, are what I would characterize as indicative of a, let's just say, relaxed security culture. A ton of embedded credentials, API keys, and so on. You did report this to them. What's your sense on the security culture?
They did not give me any indication of anything being remediated, which you can see in my paper. When you look at the overview, right, it'll say like remediated and it says unknown. That's what the U means in my paper, right? Because I don't know. The only indication that I did get was just like some of them were not submitted for CVEs and not considered for remediation. And that's likely they hinted at it due to cost, having to send a technician out and swapping out hardware. So initially, like they have a bug bounty. It's a private invite thing. But yes, they did respond. And during my initial communication to them within a day and a half, great. And that we even had a few video calls and stuff like that. But they were definitely not experienced in going through MITRE like I have. And I didn't give them the option to not. Part of my methodology.
So that was, you put that on them as you need to report these to MITRE.
Yeah, that's just how I tend to do my research. I don't do bug bounties for a variety of reasons. And I don't look for credit or money or whatever. I reach out and say, hey, I just want these fixed. And I'm going to talk about them following industry standards. Here's 90 days. And either way, it's going to go out. And I let them, they asked, can we submit it to MITRE? And I threw them a bone, I guess you can say, right? And I said, sure, absolutely. And I said, you could be as vague as you want because 90 days, I'm going to put full disclosure. So you can whatever you want.
And would then be added to the CVE record, right?
I could, but I wasn't. Again, I was really trying to not push buttons. And so what that resulted in is...
No pun intended.
Yeah. What that resulted in is them combining things as they shouldn't, right? Saying that certain CVEs are for multiple devices, which is not how that works. And I wouldn't say abusing the system, but playing in it, which is definitely an issue in general. And so since that first one, I have not let them do that. I have been and now you can see why the later CVEs are much more verbose, much more specific and proper in what you would expect to see when you read CVE, because that was the end of that. Within the third disclosure, I don't know if it was a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, but they were like, oh, actually, these issues are covered by this completely different hardware. And at that point, I said, you're abusing the system. I'm just going to move forward. And in the future, I'll just let you know. And you're more than welcome to reach out to me.
And Ben, as you pointed out, thankfully, we have somebody like John who is not just out there trying to pay rent with bug bounties, because often, as you point out in your video, which we'll link to, what goes along with a bug bounty is a non-disclosure agreement, which in essence gives the vendor, the right to keep it secret, but arguably also to not even fix it, because now you're bound to just keep your mouth shut about it.
It's a very fancy way of saying payoff.
Yeah, look, what I did for over 10 years was pen testing and red teaming, and that's all NDAs. So the stuff I'm going to do for fun or for passion or for the greater good, right? I'm not going to do it under net. Like, I just refuse. Otherwise, I'm just doing my day job for fun. Right. So that's part of my motivation as well.
Yeah, and I've spoken to people at Flock most of whom have confidentially spoken to me, like not really on the record. They didn't want to be named in the video or anything like that. And from my understanding, the last time I looked, they didn't have a chief's. I don't think they had a CISO, did they? Yeah, I think I don't know if they're still looking for one. It seems like their security team is very limited at the moment.
Yeah, I didn't speak on that, but so I did end up meeting the head of product security. And from my understanding, at least the initial meetings I had with them, they're one internal hardware security engineer. I don't know if that's changed. And I can say that they were not threatening, or they were definitely appreciative and interested, and given I'm very transparent and I really try to be professional about it as well. But they weren't combative or disinterested. Regardless, I don't want my work to speak on like a Flock as a company. And I think this is a systemic issue in the industry, but in regards to the people themselves, right? I don't want it to reflect badly on them. I don't think it's their decision to not address anything or to downplay the severities and stuff like that, for sure.
Did they offer you a job?
They did not.
They offered me. I got informally offered a job, which it was actually one of the funnier moments of this. Just speaking to an employee, they told me that they were hiring in security and that they wanted to set me up. Right. And I literally asked them if they needed a lawyer, because I don't work in info security. Like I might be a hacker in my own free time or whatever, but and I was like, but like a lawyer probably gets paid better, so why not hire me as that? I don't have any legal formal training as a lawyer, but since you're just hiring me for any job, why not make me a lawyer or a pilot? That'd be cool.
Head of your marketing.
Right. At this point, I feel like they're just more interested in the free pen tests that they're getting than bringing me on board.
So can we talk about the end of life issue? Because I found that really interesting. First of all, they're using open source Android IoT version of Android on many of these devices. And John, as you discovered, many of them are an end of life non-supported version of Android things, 8.1 or something like that. And that many of the deployed devices are running that. And again, the problem with end of life is that end of life means no more support and critically no more security updates. So as code rot happens and vulnerabilities get discovered, these devices are not going to be patched. Do we understand why they would even allow any of their deployed cameras to have an end of life operating system? Do they lack the ability to do OTAs and update the OS, or is it just
no? That infrastructure exists. Interestingly, I never heard of Android things, to be transparent, before this. I have plenty of experience with Android. Yeah. So it's not just end of life, it's like deprecated, right? There's a difference between an old Android version that like they can pay Google, let's say, to give them security updates, and something that's like literally dead.
I think we wrote about it at Security Ledger like a long time ago, probably when they announced it, but like you don't hear about it much.
I don't have a clear answer, at least from them, of why they went with that. What I can say is that it's very well documented, supported at the time, right? There's a lot of docs, and it's also extremely cheap. And it's also a great way to build a relationship, let's say, with the manufacturer, with Cloud, right? If you do want it. Let's take this off, which is good enough to run this stuff at the least, right? And build this relationship with them. Because the compute box, which is a newer device, which wasn't really specifically covered in Ben's video, like that uses ThunderCom, which is just like CloudCom as well, but like the latest and greatest SOM, which is still, I found my way in, and still runs the same vulnerable apps, but obviously a much more hardened embedded OS itself, right?
Ben, what are your thoughts on that? We know this with like broadband routers and stuff like this. These kind of abandoned but connected and functioning devices are just a huge source of risk out in our environment, whether it's Volt Typhoon compromising them or just somebody who wants to track their former girlfriend or something like that.
Right? Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where if I wanted to make a device that merely sent out a specific RF signal to trigger my chicken coop door to close remotely, why would I use a Raspberry Pi 5 and a full-scale desktop Linux platform? Like, I just see it's like, I suppose maybe a person who had never built anything before might do that just because the tutorials are easier, the documentation is a little bit more user-friendly. But realistically, even when I looked at like the Vigilant Solutions LPRs, yeah, I mean, they were running like very low-level proprietary software that just did one thing and did it pretty good, especially for whenever they were made, 2018 or 2019, where the devices I was looking at. But yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. From the impression I got when talking to somebody from the company was that they actually need techs to go out and replace the hardware in order to update to a more modern version of Android on these older cameras, and they just simply can't get that. They can't do that right now.
John, does that strike you as a plausible explanation? And is it about hardware limitations, or is it about staffing and getting people to actually go out and service tens of thousands of cameras or millions of cameras?
Yeah, so that's definitely from the horse's mouth, right? Like it's definitely discussed with me. But I will say that, of course, regardless of the operating system, right, there is, of course, a way to harden to a baseline the applications themselves, right? Because a lot of the issues are with the apps themselves that are used across devices and from many different versions. So there's definitely a case there. Of course, enabling things like secure boot and so on. That's obviously something that you can do that would greatly benefit them. That doesn't require new hardware. So is it ideal? No. Is it impossible to get it to a point where it's not as bad as it is? For sure. And then something else that I can bring up, since you mentioned supply chain, is something that I did submit a CWE in regards to this and some other research I did. So not a CVE, but a CWE, right? For a new attack vector, which I informally dubbed the flea market supply chain attack. And it's something that I leveraged here as well, where part of the issue as well, especially like with these end of life stuff, is when I go to the manufacturers of these SOMs, like I just take a picture of it, if at most, or give them a serial number, and they say, hey, like you didn't buy this, like someone else did. How did you get this? And then they give me access to the SDKs and the fire hoses and everything else like that as well, right? So there's definitely an entire attack vector, again, not specific to Flock, but in general with embedded and IoT stuff that's just missing in protecting that type of stuff, right? Which it most definitely should. They have contracts with the manufacturers, right? Like obviously manufacturer knows something's weird, but they just do it anyway. And that opens a whole can of worms of right to repair and so on. And then the other thing besides Android, they also use ESP chips, which is when I was talking about his gate, like that would be probably what you would use for your gate. But those are like 10 cents to a few dollars. I, again, cannot understand why that would be the path, except in a prototype, right? And that's my impression, is that they're doing it really successful, right? They're doing really well. And so maybe it's just, here we build a prototype, here this works, right? And then it became, here, now let's just deploy them in mass. And I can most definitely see that be the case.
Okay. So Ben, a question for you, because you obviously get a huge audience on YouTube. My guess is you probably have followers who are working in law enforcement and communities that are using this technology. And what's your sense of whether the end users or customers here, whether it's a law enforcement agency or a homeowners association or whatever, Are they aware of these security issues? Do they really care about them? And is the company doing anything to actually try and address these issues and harden these surveillance ecosystems that they've got deployed?
This is my biggest challenge. Like out of anything in this video or this video series, I guess now, making people care is probably the largest mountain that I have to climb. Making cops care, I guess there's two different ways to look at that. I've met with multiple police officers. There's been police officers where I've literally sat at a table with the device and had them push the button and showed them that the stuff that I could access on the device with them right there. And the response was like, yeah, but like you have your phone in your pocket and that tracks you. And it's okay, but yeah, I could turn that off. But you understand that this is really bad because I could Photoshop one of these images and then put it back into the system. I could remove things that I could make your job very difficult or impossible when you're using these devices. I told them about some of the other discoveries of the ArcGIS, the leaking API data, where you could see the location of cop cars. And I've not gotten a cop to really care. And even if I did, it's if their commander doesn't care, then they'll just get reprimanded for saying anything or ignored.
Sure.
On the other side, it's if you're depending on police officers for your bar of how secure things should be with IoT devices or camera devices or whatever it is, I can't imagine a dumber way to look at security just because it's not what they do. Like, why not depend on your lawn, the people who mow your lawn? They're not good at that type of thing. One thing that I have gotten pushback from is the USB thing. Is having USB authenticator, which I'm like, yeah, you could just have this on your tool chain. And they're like, yeah, but we're already carrying so much stuff. We'll leave it at home. You have a gun, you have a taser, you have a lot of important things. I'm sure you could just put this on your little holster and like, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But yeah, I've seen a lot of pushback with that. Apparently the reason why 2FA or MFA is not mandatory with Flock is because some police departments are simply like, no, it's too much of a hassle, or no, we don't want to pay for our police officers or the people who have access to the system to have phones, to have to use this, which obviously unveils a whole bunch of bigger problems. But cops aside, it's funny because I there's people in my life who just aren't on the same soapbox that I am, thankfully, because I would be driven crazy if they were. And I ask them, like, okay, what is the thing? What's the thing that's going to make this pop for you where you just want to start cutting these cameras down because you're so mad that they're there tracking you? And it's different for everyone, and you have to find that thing. But one thing that I think that the one thing that I think in the 2026 privacy issue of the year, in my opinion, is that in so many different states in America, people they're taking pictures of their driver's license or their ID and verifying their information to look at pornography. And all it takes is one or two breaches of one of these porn sites. And now all of that is going to be bundled with the other OSINT data. And then that's going to be bundled with the license plates. And now gay people are going to be outed. People's furry fetishes or whatever it is that they searched one time is now going to be part of this overall chain or the sequence of information on someone. And I think that might be the thing that might make people care, is when you have to get divorced as a result of a security breach or something like that. Like, I think that, unfortunately, that might be what has to happen.
Ashley Madison, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. That was small, at least. Yeah.
You're bringing me back.
Yeah.
You're bringing me back. Yeah. Ashley Madison. Yeah. Do you guys have time for two more questions?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Ben, I'm going to start with you, which you said one of the things, it's hard to get people to care, but as it turns out, you and John have been successful in getting some of our representatives in Washington, D.C., U.S. Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon and Representative Raja Krishnamoorthi from Illinois, to actually send a letter to Flock asking him to answer some questions about the security and data privacy issues that you raised.
To the FTC?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. To the FTC. That's
Yeah.
right. And Flock as well,
Mhm.
including the lack of two-factor authentication. So just the ability to access these devices with the username and password that clearly.
I think the two things in terms of getting senators or Congress, people in Congress to pay attention, the two big things, I think the 2FA, because these are people whose kids have to use 2FA to log into Fortnite. So it's like clearly that's a pretty obvious, glaring, low-hanging fruit that they can understand. You don't have to be an expert to know that. And the other thing was, finding leaked data in Russian language on the dark web. I think that's okay. Do you need more evidence that this is a national security risk than that? I'm not really sure. Like, maybe if I found one in Chinese, you'd be more. I'm not really sure. Like, what political leaning needs which language? I have no idea. But I think those were the things that made them the most.
So did you have a chance to talk with Senator Wyden or Rep. Christian Northeast?
I spoke with Wyden's staff. I spoke with John Ossoff's staff here in Georgia. I've spoken with a lot on the record and off the record, and it was during a government shutdown. It's funny because now my email box is like filled with meeting. It's filled with like calendar. Pick a time to meet with this representative because I had reached out to so many of them and the government was shut down. And therefore, I guess our national security was shut down. I didn't think that was part of it. But no, so now I'm getting all these meeting requests and I'm trying to figure out, okay, am I going to be speaking with an intern or do they know what this is now that the letter's been written? So I've been trying to navigate through that. But I don't know if it's going to result in anything, unfortunately, but I do think that the reason that letter was so important is one of the reasons that letter is so important is because I can't say this is a national security risk. I can, but I can't say it with confidence because I don't really know. And then also
and the title.
Like this morning, Oakland voted down expansion, a $2 million expansion of Flock safety. And I've been talking to their city council and worked closely with them, trying to get them to understand all these things. And a letter like that goes a long way in a city council. Like we're just like, this is a national security risk. This is basically a call for an investigation from the FTC into this company. At that point, when something like that exists and you're showing it and presenting it to city council, and if they clear it, and if your citizens are getting hacked, like at what point is the city liable? And the liability starts getting a little bit more ominous to everybody. And same thing with Home Depot. I've been working with communicating with a lot of people who invest in Home Depot, where it's, when you're sharing your customers' data with law enforcement and vice versa for shoplifting or whatever it is that you think you're gaining from this, and all it takes is one person to get shot or tased for maybe not having their green card on them or something like that. And now Home Depot is liable for those things. For what? Like, how does this benefit? Just sell hammers. And I don't understand why this has to be, why you're even involved in this in the first place. So, I think in a lot of ways, it really helps in those types of situations where you're not trying to be political. You're just trying to say, hey, this helps your cause to know about these vulnerabilities and these issues.
Yeah. And just to clarify, I'm not a fan of surveillance technology, but the goal of my research or anything, which is why I'm not a figurehead, which is why hence Ben, right? And I think demonstrated and provided an outlet of people seeing or understanding or whatever my research better, right? It's not like I didn't tell Flock and don't want them to fix it or expect them to lose all their contracts or anything like that. So I think that also is a big part of, or it's an important note in the perspective where I'm not coming from anti-Flock or even anti-surveillance. It's more of just whatever it is out there, because I'm jaded. I've been doing this for a long time. I know how insecure things are firsthand across the board. So it's at least I just want things to be more secure. If someone can take that,
John, let's give Flock a little help here. I'm going to ask you, if you were appointed CISO or a product security manager at Flock, you got an ecosystem of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deployed cameras with the security issues that you discovered and others have discovered. What would your approach be to solving this problem?
Yeah, so I actually have a great defenders checklist that I release along with the white paper that has, I think, 200 points. And then additionally, really, it's a great lesson, which is rare and gives insight to the secure design instead of secure coding. And you need to do it, again, as we know in the industry, like from the beginning is a lot better than doing it after it's already been made. So I think this is a great lesson that it isn't coding this time. It's hardware, but that's still that same do it right the first time and you don't have to worry about it.
And is there a fix, do you think, John, for the deployed devices? Is there a way to harden them?
For sure. Yeah. Whether it be disabling USB ports that aren't needed or changing them to not allow data, to really main goal would be to change all the defaults, right? Swap out all the apps, which a lot of them, and I wrote that in the conclusion of my paper, really a lot of the stuff is not heavy lifting. But the stuff that is heavy lifting is if someone unscrews a device from the pole, which is a whole different ballgame, right? In that case, no, you're not going to really be able to do much. There are like one-time fuses and stuff like that, right? That their stuff uses. But to get rid of the initial vector, really the biggest thing is, again, to disable the ports, the USB ports, or not include them ideally, and then change the hotspot password. And that at least will stop Joe Schmo. It's not going to stop an APT or an experienced attacker, but at least it's going to stop Joe off the street from being able to compromise these.
I think they would have to change some of their wording too, though. They would have to stop claiming that every single thing is encrypted during the entire life cycle and stuff like that. I think that's probably not going to be possible with the current ecosystem that they have without, especially on the older cameras. But
okay, Ben, final question for you. The stakes here are quite high because as we've seen, these types of cameras, whether they're Flock or other makers, are being used to track people. We've seen in states that have passed abortion laws and stuff that women have been tracked, leaving the state to receive care. So the stakes are very high. Obviously, we can think of the ways that a stalker or somebody else could abuse this technology to
already have.
It's
already been done.
Already been done. So if I were to give you the federal role of overseeing this type of technology, what do you think would be some policy or regulatory approaches that might address some of the problems that we're seeing here? Are there bigger fixes than just software patch for this?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll take it. I am the
I thought you would.
I am the president, and I'm the first
the czar. You're the cyber czar.
Yeah, I'm the first left libertarian president. It'll be great. No, I think so. Fundamentally, this is a Fourth Amendment violation. So and I think that eventually the Supreme Court, whether it's left or right, whether it's weighted left or right, I think that the Supreme Court and many state Supreme Courts are eventually going to rule on this. Because if you go back and look at Carpenter v. United States, it was laid out very in plain English. Like, you cannot track a person beyond one cell phone tower without a warrant, because you can find out that what church they're going to, you could find out information about their sexuality, all sorts of things that are deemed private, that a person has a right to privacy. And so, right off the bat, this type of thing is an issue there. Secondly, having a private company do all of this in such a pervasive way where they're leasing their data to police departments and law enforcement agencies and businesses and homeowners associations, where they're leasing the hardware, where, how many instances now do we have where a city or a county tried to remove the hardware? There was that one in Missouri where a county commissioner got arrested because the Flock contract ended. He removed the camera because the technicians wouldn't come out. He ended up getting arrested on multiple felonies, which were later cleared like a year later. But so the answer there is you can't really, under no circumstance, especially in a private business, you can't have a massive database of everybody's license plate and open source intelligent information be secure. It just can't happen if it's all in one database, especially if however many tens or hundreds of thousands of people have access to it. And that's not even including the hardware vulnerabilities and the API vulnerabilities and all that stuff. Right off the bat, it's okay, this needs to be fragmented the way it used to be, where if you look at the way that we deal with data as a public system of public libraries or something like that. You can find out if somebody else needs a book, you just have to make a request for it. It's not all in one centralized database. But at the very start, as I mentioned in the video, that none of these, the stuff that John found, and even some of the stuff that I found and our other researcher found, or the other researcher that I worked with on this video, all of these things would have been found by a red team had a single city, county, business, homeowners association, state, whatever have you, a law enforcement agency, had a single one done a security audit of these devices and not taken a private company's word for it. And so it's at what point, I'm more than happy to dislike flock safety for a wide variety of reasons, some personal, some less personal. But at what point do we have to say, maybe it's your own fault to a lot of these cities and law enforcement agencies? This is not a charity. This is not that they will say whatever, that they're selling you something, that they have no interest other than making money. That's why they're doing this.
Yeah.
And if they don't do it, their investors will sue them. So
anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to say?
Yeah, no, I think we got it covered.
John?
Yeah, again, I'm going to reiterate for the 15th time. I really hope that, again, it's clear that I'm doing this not right, because I just want to see things that are recording me or that I do interact with be in the best shape, the best hardened state that they can possibly be.
Absolutely. And we're all grateful to folks like you, John and Ben, using your own time and effort to help expose serious and exploitable security vulnerabilities in publicly deployed technology that is collecting and storing very sensitive information. Should the government be finding this for us and protecting the public interest? Probably. But absent that, hey, guys, thanks so much for doing this work. Super important. And hopefully it will beget some improvements in security and privacy, right?
Yeah. Hopefully. I guess like the departing message is you might not care now, but when your porn searches are attached to your license plate, you're going to care then.
Hey, John, Ben, thanks so much for coming on Security Ledger podcast, and definitely would love to follow up down the road and keep the lines of communication open. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.